Hello, and welcome to this special episode of The Empire's Edge. I'm Matt Sinkovich, your dungeon master and storyteller. Today we have a backstory for Jakob Treadstone. So please, sit back and enjoy finding out about the origin of this pinnacle ranger from the town of Gryan in the Brimroar Hills. Splitting a Second by Matthew J. Sinkovich. An impact. Wood on wood echoed dull through the Brimroar Hills. Two hunters stopped to listen. The older man in the lead turned and spoke with his eyes to freeze, but the younger already had. Jakob Treadstone watched and waited for the next cue. He listened past the man's graying hair and weather-worn face to the subtle sounds and betraying scrapes of hooved animals moving. The air smelled of damp stone and juniper. The report of the bighorn ram's crash echoed again. This time, Jakob heard the soft clack of their hooves preceding the collision as they rushed in, raising up on their hind legs. "I knew that was about to happen," Jakob mouthed in a whisper of sound, his patchy light beard a contrast to his dark eyes. Ashton Garrett smiled, a memory retrieved from the forest, but he extended the fingers of his right hand. Jakob nodded and soundlessly mouthed, "How far?" Ashton surveyed their surroundings, his stained cloak looking more mottled gray than green, and mouthed, "Quarter mile." The set of his shoulders told Jakob that they were about to move. Crouched low, the elder hunter picked his way through the loose hillside stones and drooping pine boughs. Jakob measured his movement and, like Ashton, left each obstacle untouched, but was reminded again that his new green cloak stood out garishly against the muted fall colors. Reaching the tree line afforded a clear view of the narrow valley below. Moving on all fours now, they achieved the edge of the bluff. Ashton looked between the sweeping roots of an upturned cedar tree. Jakob poised between two mast-like branches. 400 yards across the draw, a mob of rams squared off while the ewes drifted through wild rye and wheatgrass. The men shrunk to the cover of the deadfall. Ashton spoke at a low volume, barely moving his mouth. "See the one with the broomed horns? Blunted?" Jakob nodded. "The base of its horns are 16 or 17 inches around, and the growth lines are dark. He's the oldest." "And that's what he wants?" Jakob asked. "That's what the wizard wants, old ram horn," Ashton said. "I'd never seen a wizard in Gryan before," Jakob said. Ashton nodded, said he was from somewhere called Razia. "Why does he want the horns?" "How by Berfidian would I know?" Ashton said, low and soft like a lullaby. But Jakob caught the meaning in the man's gray-green eyes and stopped asking questions. "Here's what we'll do." Ashton pointed at his hand as though a map. "Find a way down to our right. Hug the tree line. I'll circle left, approaching the mob from above, out of the tree line, on the other side." Keeping the cover, Jakob grasped a broken cedar branch and levered himself to peek at the rams. The proximity of the exposed wood's cinnamon pine smell masked the accustomed scent of the Brimroar. It struck his brain like blindness. The concussion of the rams snapped him to awareness. "See the large juniper by an outcropping of limestone?" Ashton asked. "Yes." Jakob slipped back to the cover. He sniffed the residue of the cedar oil on his hand. "I'll come out there." Jakob nodded. "Look at the sun." He paused. "When it gets there," he pointed, keeping his hand close to his chest. "Move back up the draw toward them." Jakob nodded. "One of two things will happen. They'll move from whichever of us they spot first. Once they move, stop. Let them settle. If they move up, I'll take the shot on the big one." "Right," Jakob said. "If they move down, you take the shot." "Okay. What's the best shot?" "Its heart's just above where its front leg meets its body. That'll kill it, and you'll have a little leeway since it's a good-sized target." He made a circle with his hands, without the fingers and thumbs touching, and raised an eyebrow at Jakob. "Now, I once shot one straight on, through the eye. That killed it good, but it's a smaller target. Missed by a little, It'll only glance off its head. Okay, Ashton, we'll see. You don't sound convinced, son. Jacob glanced down the draw, then back up. Well, you're sending me down, so I figure you know they'll go up. So it doesn't matter saying anything about taking the shot, because you're going to. Ashton smiled and shifted his weight. They will go up, right? Watching the mob, the older hunter chose his moment to cross to the nearest tree. Won't they go up? Jacob asked again. Ashton's eyes smiled. He mouthed and signaled, I'll tell you in a few hours. He moved soundlessly into the scrubby trees near the edge of the bluff. Jacob watched the spot where the man disappeared for a full minute before he marked his cover and moved the other way along the edge of the bluff. The morning played out as autumn in the hills became late summer for a couple of hours. Aware of his slow progress, but keeping himself silent and hidden, Jacob imagined that Ashton had already reached his position. He looked for reassurance in the trees and hills around him and imagined Ashton's admonishment when they rendezvoused, after everything had gone wrong. Jacob froze, his breath stopped, and the hair in his arms stood up. Already in a crouch, he panned his head toward the trees. He fought the urge to pivot, directing his bow toward the cover on his right. He strained, reaching into the forest with his senses, allowing time to pass, allowing himself to breathe. Ashton's voice came to his mind. The times we need to be nimble and react are the very times our bodies want to seize. Readiness is choice. There, his brain screamed. Something heavy shifted its weight in the pine needles 40 feet into the trees. Branches obscured everything, but he believed two things. Some being dogged him, and it walked on two legs. It was moving now, he was sure of it, heading back the way he had just come, except it stayed in the trees. What was that? He said to himself. The impact of two rams told him how far down along the draw he'd come. Must have been a bear, he said as he got moving. He remembered Ashton saying that they can see, hear, and smell better standing up. He must have smelled me and wanted to take a better look. The bluff turned into an area of broken ground and boulders. Jacob turned left into it, picking his way down through a maze of washouts, landslides, and fallen trees. Periodically, he'd glance at the sun. When he reached the grass-covered draw, he turned up into it. Encouraged by the warblers, he walked for another hour before bringing the scattered herd of bighorns into view. He could neither see Ashton nor his juniper and rock outcropping. But he hunkered down under a bushy mountain birch. The mass of yellowing green neatly concealed the young hunter. An hour passed. The bighorns remained content in the upper draw. Jacob tested the air and listened for movement. He noted the sun's position and departed the natural blind. He traversed the V of the draw much easier than the broken region and came upon the lower edges of the herd more quickly than he'd anticipated. Their muskiness was all over the wind blowing toward him. Jacob stalked his way through thick cover, fanning them away, yet squeezing them toward Ashton's juniper tree. The large ram leapt out alone and made for the trees, covering great distance with each stride. Jacob measured the spans. 300 yards. Too far for Ashton, he thought. Too far for me. But at the tree line, it raised up like to strike a rival male. But there's nothing there, Jacob whispered. A form moved within the tree line. Jacob knocked an arrow as a tremor went down his spine. The ram twisted about, falling as it reversed itself. The form loomed larger. Even from this distance, Jacob could see it would tower over a man. The ram righted itself, legs pumping, hooves splaying dirt and moss. An arrow appeared in its flank. The animal slapped the ground and tumbled end over end until it slid ungracefully into a bush. Yet, the moment it hit the ground, the strike of a second arrow hitting wood echoed hammer-like. The shaft pinned the arm of the looming form to a tree. Ashton Garrett, at a full run, bow held before him, knocked a third arrow even as the massive form, bellowing, tore itself free. The third arrow clattered into the trees where the thing disappeared. Jacob sprung forward, running up the draw, crashing through cover, leaping over logs. "Jacob!" Ashton yelled from his crouched position above where he covered the tree line. "Coming up!" Jacob yelled back. "I just wanted to make sure that was you I heard rushing up behind me," the older hunter yelled with equal intensity. Arrow knocked, Jacob took position on Ashton's right, though facing slightly away, covering the archer's more vulnerable side. But the younger man now wondered if his elder actually had a vulnerable side. "What was that?" Jacob asked through panting breaths. "I don't know. Where'd it go?" Ashton made a slight gesture with his bow toward the tree line. Even though Jacob wasn't looking at his mentor, he knew exactly what he'd done. "What now, Ashton?" "I'm listening." Jacob quieted himself and willed his heart to slow, but it continued to thump in his ears. Minutes passed. He stole a glance over his shoulder. Ashton nodded to him and moved toward the trees. Jacob's eyes went wide, but he moved up with him. The young man watched everything, listening for sounds, dredging the air, cursing a random bobbing leaf. They stopped where the stub of Ashton's second arrow remained in a tree. Liquid was splattered there. "What do you make of this, Jacob?" The younger hunter managed to look at it without taking his eyes off the likely approaches through the trees. He sniffed it. "It's like the black stuff that seeps from an oak when it has wet wood." Ashton nodded. "I thought so too." "When a tree's been lightning struck the previous season, but was too strong to die," Jacob said. Ashton fixed his gaze on the young man, as though he had heard something more than the spoken words. "One more thing," Jacob said. "I sensed something near me on the other side of the draw, 3 hours ago." Ashton wrinkled his brow. "I couldn't place it. It might have been that thing." Ashton nodded. "Let's go," he finally said. They moved backwards, down the side of the draw, Jacob inching slightly slower, covering their retreat. They stopped at the kill. "We're safe here," Ashton said. "We're far enough from the tree line that if it comes back and charges, we could get 5 or 6 arrows in it before it reaches us. And if it reaches us?" Ashton touched the pommel of his sword-like long knife, and he left his expected smile somewhere in the Brimroar. "Keep watch," he said, shouldering his bow. He stood quietly for 6 or 7 heartbeats. "Big horns," he finally said. "I figure the bases are 17 inches. The outer curve around 38 inches. And looking how the tips are broomed, if he hadn't fought so many duels, they could have been 40s. "Trophies in any Confederation's Great Hall," Jacob said. "No doubt," Ashton said, pulling his long knife to take its head. "You're not going to field dress it?" "No time. We'll take this for the contract. Take both haunches. We've got to eat. We'll leave the rest. If that thing was after a meal, this might occupy it." He roped the head to his pack frame. "We're out of here in 5. They switched places and tasks. Jacob removed a haunch. "Ashton, how did you do it?" The hunter kept his eyes on the narrow horizon of the draw, all directions. "Do what?" "Put an arrow in that ram's heart at a dead run, another in that monster, and a third chasing after it before I could tell what was going on." "Well, the ram was just getting up." "Huh?" "I didn't have to lead it." They both laughed. "You know what I mean, Ashton. You sized it up in a split second. How could you do it all?" Ashton's attention remained focused on the draw. "Jacob, sometime you'll see that there's too much to do in a second. You have to split it." "Split it?" "Give each thing its own piece of time, and believe it's enough." Jacob tied the haunches to his pack. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "I know." Exiting the draw, Ashton guided them north for over an hour, then east. Jacob was trying to get used to the ram's head on Ashton's pack, staring at him. "Where are you taking us?" he asked. "After you take us west to Gryan." The ram's head swung to the left as Ashton turned to look at him. "I have to see about something. Drop one of the haunches." Jacob opened his mouth to say something, but closed it instead and cut the leg loose. They walked east through undulating hills as the shadows lengthened before them. At a ridge crest, Ashton took them south. Jacob said nothing, but imagined home and Gryan getting further and further away. Before all the shadows bled together, they turned west. The quiet of the fall warblers and distant tap of woodpeckers turned into the peeping of the last of the tree frogs. Night slipped closer and closer when Ashton turned north again. Before long they turned east. Ashton led them through full dark. They passed through the difficult time until their eyes adjusted, and the hillside rock, grassy draws, and bare cedars glowed in the wan light. Jacob recognized the terrain through his boots and the vague contours, so it didn't surprise him when Ashton stopped and crouched low to the ground. "Do you know where we are?" the older hunter asked. "Yes, where I dropped the haunch." "Look for sign," Ashton said. They peeled away from each other, casting about in the brush. "I have snapped branches," Jacob said after a few minutes. "The dead, light stuff in cedars." "How high?" Ashton's voice came from a nebulous form 5 yards away. 10, maybe 12 feet? "I found the haunch," Ashton said. "Whatever the thing is, it's not hungry." "Any tracks?" "Yes." "Tell me what you see, farm boy." Jacob ignored farm boy. "Ours and an ox." "Strange. What?" "They're heavy. Heavier than an ox's. It's how they're spaced." "Like an ox walking upright," Ashton said. Jacob looked toward the disembodied voice, then beyond it to the deepening quiet. "Jacob," Ashton said, "we're being tracked." The moon and stars arced across the sky. The wolf constellation emerged nose first from the eastern trees and glided, a colossus, over their heads. They trudged on. When the pre-dawn glow seemed to give chase to the wolf's tail, cold crept from the ground to numb their faces and hands. The men faced ever taller, ever steepening, treeless hills as the light rose. Sagebrush and stunted birches dominated the area, and the morning air rasped dry in their mouths. "Is that what you needed to see?" Jacob asked. Ashton kept his nose toward the east. "What? The sunrise?" "No. If it was tracking us." "Yes. Because you didn't want to lead it to Gryan." Jacob had to wait for an answer, but Ashton finally said, "Yes." "Why would it be after us?" "You never talked about a thing like that in the Brimroar. I've never heard anyone else talk about a two-legged ox with ram's horns. What does it mean?" "I have a suspicion," Ashton said. "Care to share it?" "No." "Any reason why not?" "Because sharing it won't help us now." Jacob tried again after a few minutes. "Where are we going? I don't recognize this place." "To where the Brimroar meets the Slagmark Desert." Jacob looked about on all sides, taking in the terrain. Ashton plodded on. "Because the Brimroar is at its narrowest due east of Gryan and the Slagmark. If we went south, we'd run into other dangerous things, and then we'd be pinned between it and what follows. There's not much out here, no large predators, and we have our best advantage with our bows in open country, or possibly in a narrow canyon with only one way in." Absorbing it all, Jacob moved alongside the older hunter as they crested a bleak ridge. "So you mean to fight it?" Ashton stopped and took Jacob by the shoulders. "I mean to kill it." He pointed back the way they'd come. Jacob saw this series of hills descending to the west and making the summit 2 ridges away. A brutish, cloven-hoofed, horned monster strode along their path. Ashton gave him a smart pat on the shoulder to get him going and started off himself. Jacob looked back once more and saw the monster pause and look up at him. It raised a muscled arm, pointing at the young hunter, before rejoining its pursuit. The young man swallowed hard and went after Ashton. The eastern slope fell away in great overlapping fingers of rock. Deep chasms dropped between them. In the distance, and far below them, a huge tan haze rippled, stretching north and south as far as Jacob could see. They moved at a brisker pace toward the Slagmark. There was no moisture and suddenly no greenery. A couple of times to avoid backtracking, they leapt from outcropping to outcropping. They rushed on as the sun on the rocks baked them. "Ashton, why don't you drop the ram's head?" Jakob asked, panting. "Because I'm not sure if it's after us or the horns." "If it's after the horns, why not drop them and let it have them?" "Part of my suspicion. What if it gets the horns? And then somehow there's two of them." "Two of them? Would you want two of those things running around the Brimroar? And what if we unknowingly taught it what kind of horns to look for?" "You mean this could be the start of something really bad?" "That's my suspicion. Did I mention that I hate this?" "No, but I got that." They continued their dash down the finger rocks. Ashton's head snapped to the left, and he shoved Jakob sideways to a ledge. Concussion and fire whisked Ashton from the rocks. He bounced off 2 ledges before striking the bottom, some 30 feet down. "Ashton!" Jakob yelled, bounding down, ledge to ledge. Ashton, grimacing, sucking air through his clenched teeth, staring at his blackened, bleeding arm as though it wasn't part of his body. "Look out!" he yelled to Jakob. Pivoting, the hunter knocked and fired an arrow. The wizard cried out as the missile went through his shoulder, taking him from view. "We've got to go, Jakob." "No, I got him. It'll take more." "Ashton, this is a good spot. He sticks his head out, I'll hit him again. He can cast death on us here." The shock of thunder from the rock above rained a cloud of stones on them. The next moment brought the unmistakable sound of clattering hooves. "He's brought it to us," Ashton said. "Wait a second." Jakob dashed far out on the next finger of rock. Above, the wizard talked with the bull-like monster. Jakob leveled an arrow and shot the caster. He screamed and fell against the monster. Letting the wizard sink to its knees, the creature bellowed and made for the ledges. Ashton pulled his long knife and backpedaled awkwardly toward Jakob. First one arrow, then a second sprung into the monster's bull-like torso. Each time it bellowed anew. It leaped from a ledge, attacking Ashton. A third arrow sunk into its chest. It swiped its claws at the hunter. Ashton parried, then sliced it across the abdomen. It punched him, snapping bones, but Ashton managed to slice it down the forearm. It kicked him solidly in the chest. The older hunter fell, hard to his back, the long knife clanging from his hand. Jakob drew his bow, but to the left. An oval of watery light appeared, and the wizard stepped through. Peripherally, Jakob saw the wizard's swimming hands readying a spell, while the monster in front of him raised its hoof to crush Ashton's skull. The young hunter whistled like a warbler, and the monster lifted its head. Release. With the arrow in mid-flight toward the bull's eye, Jakob knocked another and swept toward the wizard, splitting the second. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this Jakob Treadstone backstory. Find more stories at mattsinkovich.com. Shout out to Mike from Uncharted Territory for naming the creature type and sketching the zombie tracker Spencer Krebs from episodes 5, 6, and 7. It's now a Banewhite. Great name, Mike. Thanks. Check out his post at theempiresedge.com under Shoutouts. Send us your comments and original art. We'd love to post it.